Hello everyone out there in the void. This video is just going to be about some ideas I had regarding the descent myth during my ritual work during Samhain. I'm just now getting around to making the video for it. Myths are sacred stories that use symbolism to explain the nature of the world and to teach life lessons. There are many different ways to read and interpret myths. By reading from different perspectives, the same story can offer many different lessons, which is probably why myths endure and still feel relevant for thousands of years. While doing some ritual work for Samhain this year, I had a thought about the myth of Inanna's descent. I haven't heard this interpretation before, and I'm sure it's not what the original writers meant when they wrote this myth. But usually when people work with this myth, they are focused mainly on the transformation aspects. The old self dying so the new self can be reborn and that sort of thing, which is a perfectly valid way to work with this myth. But as with all myths and stories, that isn't the only way to interpret it. In the descent myth, Inanna abandons heaven and earth. She has set her sights upon the great below. From the great heaven she set her mind on the great below. From the great heaven the goddess set her mind on the great below. From the great heaven Inanna set her mind on the great below. My mistress abandoned heaven, abandoned earth, and descended to the underworld. Inanna abandoned heaven, abandoned earth, and descended to the underworld. She abandoned the office of En, abandoned the office of Lagar, and descended to the underworld. She abandoned the Anna in Unug, and descended to the underworld. She abandoned the Muk Kalama in Bad Tabira, and descended to the underworld. So she abandoned her offices and temples, all of her responsibilities, and can think only of the underworld. Now, maybe it's just me, but that sounds a lot like a flowery way of describing depression and suicidal ideation. When you are in that mindset, it is difficult to focus on your responsibilities and on your life. You are only focused on wanting the pain to go away. You set your sights upon the underworld. So what if we read Inanna's insistence on going to the underworld as symbolizing suicide? She willingly goes to the underworld, the land of the dead, the land of no return. She knows what she's doing. It isn't her place as queen of heaven and earth to enter the underworld, but that is all she can think of. So she descends to Kur. She doesn't even think about how her absence will affect her loved ones. When she arrives, she is turned into a corpse. She dies. Of course, as this is a myth, and she is the hero of this myth, she is resurrected. She leaves the underworld. But when Inanna leaves the underworld, she has to send someone in her place. This ends up being her husband Dumuzi. She escapes her own suffering, symbolized by her ability to leave the underworld. But now Dumuzi must go in her place. He is left to pick up the pieces and to deal with the consequences of Inanna choosing to descend into the underworld. By ending her own suffering, she only passes that suffering on to the person she is supposed to love most of all, her husband. She has condemned Dumuzi to the underworld. She has condemned him to suffer in her place. So we can read this myth as a message that it isn't our place as humans to try to control death. Suicide does not end your suffering, it only passes it on to your loved ones. By taking this path, you are condemning your loved ones to take your place in the underworld. If you or a loved one are experiencing suicidal thoughts or other mental health struggles, call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Caring counselors are there to help you, and you are not alone. So that was just an alternate interpretation of the descent myth that I thought of while meditating on this myth during my Samhain rituals. There are many, many different ways to interpret this myth, and I just wanted to share my thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.